George Washington Carver by Drew Mollenhauer. George Washington Carver was born into slavery in 1864. Him and his mother lived in a small house on Moses Carver's land in Diamond Grove, Missouri. Towards the end of the Civil War, Southern bushwhackers raided the farm and kidnapped baby Carver and his mother. Moses hired a man named John Bentley to find them and recover his property. John Bentley was able to find baby Carver, but they still don't know what happened to his mother to this day. When they found Carver, he was really close to death, so Moses and his wife took Carver in. When Carver got older, he was still too frail to work in the slave fields, so he helped out with household chores. He also had a lot of time to explore nature. His love for nature inspired him to paint pictures. Carver would make his own art supplies out of sticks, berries, and animal hair that he found. Unlike many slave children, Carver was able to get an education. At the age of 11, Carver would walk 10 miles to attend classes at a black school. He would board at a house next to the school. He had to work for his board because they didn't have enough money to pay for it. When it was lunchtime at school, Carver would jump the fence and go over to the house he boarded in. He would help the owners with chores, and then when lunch break was over, he'd go back to school. George studied hard, and he was able to get his high school diploma. After high school, he applied at Highland College in Kansas. He was accepted. When Carver arrived, they told him that they didn't know he was black, so they turned him away. Later, in his mid-20s, he applied at Simpson College in Iowa, where blacks were accepted. After he was accepted, he began taking painting classes. At this time, he was the only black at the school. When his understanding of nature came through in his paintings, his teacher recommended him to horticulture. Carver took this advice and transferred to the Iowa State College of Agriculture. He was the first black ever at this school. When Carver finished his bachelor's degree, officials offered him a teaching position. He not only was the first black student, but now he's the first black professor. In 1896, he was offered an opportunity of a lifetime. Booker T. Washington invited him to come to Tuskegee Institute, an all-black college in Alabama. When Booker T. Washington found out that there was a black agricultural expert, he had to have him at his school. This was because there was very few black agricultural experts in the country. At the age of 31, he went to help Alabama, the slave state, gain its self-sufficiency. He arrived in Alabama by rail. He was amazed to see only cotton crops planted with no peanuts. Carver knew that this wasn't good for the soil, because when you plant only one crop, it sucks nutrients out of the soil that aren't being replaced with other crops. Carver was eager to help the South with their agricultural dilemma. When he arrived at Tuskegee, he realized that they didn't even have a laboratory for him to work in. Carver decided to take matters into his own hands. He went to the local scrapyard and picked out things that acted as lab equipment. Carver decided to go around showing farmers how planting the same crop repeatedly was sucking the nitrogen and other nutrients out of the soil. He was trying to encourage them to plant other crops. Carver created the first movable school so he could go around teaching farmers about crop rotation. Many of the farmers agreed to start crop rotation, but many of them didn't take immediate action because the banks wouldn't give out loans for any other crops other than cotton. Another main reason they didn't plant different crops was because there wasn't any markets for them. Carver warned them, though, that the boll weevil was moving at 100 miles per year and would soon be in Alabama. The boll weevil is an insect that destroys cotton crops by laying its egg in the cotton boll. When the eggs reach the larva state, they eat their way out of the boll, therefore ruining the crop. Carver was convinced that peanuts would solve this problem. In 1982, Carver began researching the peanut. Carver was able to come up with more than 300 uses for the peanut. This included paper, ink, shoe polish, floor wax, axle grease, and peanut plastic. Many people think that he invented peanut butter, but he didn't. In 1915, as he predicted, the boll weevil hit Alabama and completely destroyed cotton fields. In 1917, cotton was thrown out for peanuts.
George was able to invent a peanut oil that he recommended people should receive massages with. He especially recommended it to people with medical problems like polio. President Franklin D. Roosevelt requested massages with this oil. Many people would write letters to Carver to buy this oil. When he would produce this peanut oil, he would boil 25 pounds of peanuts at a time. When he was done, he would extract the oil by straining it through cheesecloth. George Washington Carver's work with the peanut became the foundation for a new science known as chemurgy. This is the process for discovering industrial uses for agricultural products. Like when they take corn and turn it into a biodegradable corn plastic cup. Using peanuts, soybeans, and other crops, George Washington Carver changed the course of farming in the U.S. He learned that soybean oil is composed of 5 fatty acids and that is very rich in vitamin E. When he looked at the soybean under a microscope, he could see that there were many chemical properties that would help it bond to other materials. One of Carver's first successes with the soybean was soy mayonnaise. They started working with the soybean in 1903, and by the time they were done, they had over 30 products. George Washington Carver and Henry Ford consulted on soy plastics for the cars because Ford saw Carver as a very creative person. In 1942, Ford unveiled a car that had a bushel of soy in the plastics. They advertised this plastic as dent-proof because it was very hard to dent and break. The people of Iowa State University have continued his research on soy. Even though Carver was one of the best scientists in history, he lived a very simple life. When Carver would visit farms, people would mistake him for a farmhand. As you can see, he would always have a plant in the pocket of his suit to show his appreciation for nature. Carver never married. He claimed to be fulfilled by the work that he did. In his free time, he still enjoyed to paint. He would make paint out of different colors of soil he found. After his work with the soybean, he decided to team up again with other scientists to find out if vegetable oil could someday power a combustion engine. There was only one problem. At this time, agricultural products were more expensive than fossil fuels. But they overcame these challenges and began building a foundation for biodiesel. Carver took some of the first steps toward genetic engineering by creating hybrids in his laboratory by crossing 2 specimens. Carver did these experiments for years. Tuskegee Institute still carries on his legacy. Carver also did extensive work with the sweet potato. Carver's work with the sweet potato mainly focused on the nutritional value. He knew that planting sweet potatoes would help replenish the soil with nutrients that had been lost planting cotton. He told farmers they should make it part of their crop rotation plan because it gives off nutrients other plants don't. He was able to create over 100 uses for the sweet potato in his laboratory. Some of the things that he made were sweet potato flour, paints, dyes, and fabric dyes. Over the years, Carver accepted tons of awards, but he would never take the credit. Whenever Carver would accept an award, he wouldn't take the credit himself. He would give it to God. On January 5th, 1943, at the age of 78, George Washington Carver died of natural causes at his home at Tuskegee Institute. 6 months after George Washington Carver's death, they established a national monument after him. This monument included the slave farm that Carver explored as a child. Carver was a great scientist of his time, but just imagine what he could have done at this day and age with computers and high-tech lab equipment. He could have made more discoveries than he had back then without all the fancy stuff that we have today. From being born an orphan slave child to becoming a great American hero, George Washington Carver changed history forever. His legacy will always live on with people working in the same sciences that he did.